Welcome to Horseshoe Politics. Today is September 7th, 2020, and I hope you guys all had a great Labor Day today. This video is not going to be that long. I was really busy today during this Labor Day, so I didn't really have that much time to make a video for today. But basically, today's topic is going to be about whether or not Texas is going to become a blue state in the short term and the long term. So first we're going to talk about the short term as in like just this election, and then we're going to talk about future elections. So we'll start off by talking about the 2020 election, presidential and senate, and then we're going to talk about future elections like 2022, 24, 28, so on and so forth. So before we even talk about like the present day, let's talk about the past. So Texas has been a solidly red state for several decades. Since 1980 election where it voted for Ronald Reagan by 55% to Jimmy Carter's 41%, ever since then it's been a solidly red state that Republicans, not only at the presidential level but also at the Senate and the governor level, they've all been able to depend on Texas as an easy win for Republicans. So Republicans at the presidential level never had to spend much effort into winning Texas. It was an easy 38 electoral votes for them that really helped them to win the presidency for Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and George W. Bush and Trump most recently. But before Reagan, it was kind of a swing state. In 1972, Richard Nixon won, but in 1976, Jimmy Carter won. Nixon was a Republican, but Carter was a Democrat. And before then, it was pretty solidly blue state. Texas voted for JFK, Lyndon Johnson. The one time it was red was during the 1950s when it voted for Eisenhower. But before that, it was solidly blue during the FDR era, and then it randomly voted for Herbert Hoover once in 1928. The 1928 election is where Herbert Hoover won like so many states. It was a really easy victory for him. But even then, Texas was only Republican by 3 points, 51% to Al Smith's 48%. Hoover was the Republican, Al Smith was the Democrat. But before 1928 election, it was solidly blue ever since the state had become part of the U.S. From 1876 to 1924, it had only voted for Democrats, and it voted for Democrats in pretty big margins throughout all those elections. So 1928 was a one-off. The 1950s were also one-offs with Dwight Eisenhower, but ever since the 70s and the 1980s what kind of solidified Texas as a solid red Republican state. But now you actually have a trend in the other direction that's going on now. That seems to be going on now, where Texas is slowly shifting more and more Democratic, more and more blue. And you can see that in recent elections. In 2008, John McCain won Texas by 12 percentage points, even when Obama won by a pretty big margin overall throughout the country. Same with Mitt Romney in 2012. He won Texas by 16 points, even when Obama won the U.S. as a whole by a few percentage points. But then in 2016, you have Trump versus Clinton. Trump was still able to win Texas as a Republican, but this time it was only by 9 points instead of the 16-ish points, 12 to 16 points that Republicans previously had been winning Texas. Back in 2000, when George Bush was running for president, he was able to win Texas by over 20 percentage points, and that could mainly be due to the fact that he was from Texas. That would explain it, obviously, but ever since then, Texas has slowly been shifting more and more Democratic, more and more blue. So the question is, well, there's two questions. One, will this matter for the 2020 election? Two, will this matter in future elections, including midterm elections, starting from 2022 onwards to 2024, 2026, 28, so on? For the first question, will it matter this year? Short answer, not really. Despite the fact that Joe Biden has improved several points against Trump in the past few months in the polls, even in Texas, I don't think that's going to matter too much. I still think Trump is going to be able to win Texas, although it might only be like 4 to 5 percentage points instead of the usual 9 to 10 percentage points. I still think Trump will be able to win Texas. If you look at some of the polls, it actually shows Joe Biden ahead of Trump, but I don't think that's going to last. I don't think that the actual result on election day is going to be Joe Biden beating Trump. But I still think that Texas will be closer in this presidential election than any of the ones in the past couple decades. And also, let's also look at the 2018 midterm election for the U.S. Senate. That's when Beto O'Rourke ran a notably well ran campaign, a notably good campaign against Ted Cruz, and he was almost able to win Texas against Ted Cruz as a Democrat for the Senate seat. Like, I remember the Senate race. I'm actually from Texas. That's kind of where I got the idea for this episode. But I remember back in 2018, I was looking at Beto's campaign, and a lot of people thought, oh, he might actually win. And I was telling them, no, he's not going to win. He's a Democrat in Texas. He doesn't have a chance. I thought that it would be an easy win for Ted Cruz because Texas always votes for Republicans. But I was pretty surprised when I saw that Beto O'Rourke almost won against Ted Cruz. He was about 3 percentage points short of the victory. I, some people were expecting Beto O'Rourke to win. That didn't happen, but I was still surprised that he even got that close. After that, he ran for president. That didn't go too well, as we all know. And now I think he kind of put his political career on a pause, but that's besides the point. So the point is that Texas slowly shifting more and more blue in recent years. Let's also talk about the Senate election that's going on this year in Texas, actually, with John Cornyn and MJ Hagar. I still think John Cornyn is going to easily win this Senate election. I don't even think it's going to be as close as the one in 2018 with Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz. I think John Cornyn is going to win by a good 6 to 10 percentage points. John Cornyn is up by many points in the polls against MJ Hagar. MJ Hagar is not really that notable candidate. Neither is John Cornyn, so most people are just going to revert back to their political party label, which in Texas there's more Republicans than Democrats. So I think Texas will still have a Republican Senate seat after this election. Now that we've talked about the 2020 election specifically and how Texas is almost certainly going to vote for Republicans both at the presidential level and at the Senate level, let's now talk about what Texas voting patterns is going to look like in the near future, in the next, let's say, decade. Beyond the next decade, it's hard to predict anything because everything changes, things change pretty quickly, so let's just talk about the next decade because that's something that we can actually predict without too much uncertainty. So, as we've established, Texas has been shifting more and more more and more Democratic in the last 20 years. Ever since George Bush won in 2000, it's been shifting more and more Democratic, as you can see in the presidential election results, and as you can see in the Senate election results. For example, Beto O'Rourke's Senate run in 2018. But let's talk about 2024 and maybe even 2022, but mainly 2024 and 2028, because those are the presidential election years. First, let's talk about 2022 actually. The main election in that year is Greg Abbott's election, governor of Texas. He's running for re-election in 2022. Unless he decides not to, no one knows at this moment, but if he decides to run for re-election in 2022 as governor of Texas, he's going to have to face a Democratic candidate, obviously, for that seat. And the question is whether or not Greg Abbott is going to win that election. In my opinion, I think yes, he's probably still going to win. I don't think 2 years from now is enough time for any drastic changes to happen. Because in the last election, I think it was, yeah, 2018 was his last election. Greg Abbott won by a pretty big margin. The thing about Greg Abbott is, like, he's not like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is a lot more of a controversial figure. Greg Abbott simply doesn't have that much controversy on his name to where a lot of people would turn to a Democratic candidate. But the other thing about Greg Abbott is a lot of people aren't too happy about the way he handled the pandemic this year. He was kind of, I think what a lot of people are saying is that basically the general consensus is that he reacted slowly, like he wasn't sure exactly what to do. He was kind of caught in between two opposing sides. Some people are saying, "Oh, don't have any mask mandate at all," and other people are saying, "Yo, why aren't you shutting down more things?" So it was kind of he was kind of stuck in the middle, and there were some people from both sides who don't like him as a result. But I think by 2022, hopefully this whole pandemic blows over, and I don't think people are gonna remember that much what he did in 2020 when deciding 2 years later. And Greg Abbott isn't really that controversial of a figure. He's just your average Republican, so I think he's gonna not easily, maybe not easily, but I think he can still win re-election in 2022. Now let's talk about the 2024 presidential election, and then later on the 2028 presidential election. Will Texas still remain Republican in these elections? That is honestly up for debate. That's honestly up in the air. Because Texas has been gradually shifting more and more Democratic. There's multiple reasons for that. I don't want to pinpoint it on one specific thing, but there's a lot of new people moving to Texas, and a lot of them move to the big cities. That might be the big reason why, but I'm not really an expert in that specific category. You can research into it more yourself if you want, but I'm not here to necessarily talk about why that's the case, but I'm just here to talk about what's the result of that shift. The result is that Republicans, they're going to have to come up with a new campaign strategy, a new electoral strategy. For the past several decades, starting from 1980, Texas has been a state that Republicans could easily depend on for an easy 38 electoral votes in the Electoral College. Candidates haven't really had to campaign there hard. They just knew that they would win that state. So it was an easy way because Texas has 38 electoral votes. That's a pretty big deal. That's over 10% of the votes you need to win a majority in the electoral college. So if Republicans lose that, that's actually going to mean quite a bit for them. They're going to have to find new ways to still be able to win elections, which, as long as the current electoral system that we have exists, there's always going to be a two-party system. You're never going to have only one party winning for too many elections in a row, because by the time you have one party in power for several election cycles, another party is just going to shift their electoral strategy and they move further either to the left or to the right to adjust with the new status quo. Like, I hear some people talking about how, oh, the Republican Party is just going to die out if they lose Texas. That's not really the case. The party's not just going to die out. What will happen is that they're going to have to adjust their campaign strategy to make up for the fact that they've lost Texas. Either they have to change their campaign strategy to try to win back voters in Texas, or they could just look to other states to win electoral votes. The thing about Texas is that one of the reasons why it's an important state is if you look at the results of the 2016 election, Clinton got 232 electoral votes, Trump got 306 electoral votes. Everyone was talking about how Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania gave the election to Trump. But one thing I've noticed that not many people are talking about is if you just shift Texas, which voted for Trump in 2016, if you just shift their 38 electoral votes to go for Clinton, Clinton's at 270, Trump's at 268. 270 is the amount you need to win the election. So just by shifting that one state, Texas, Clinton would have won the election. Just by adding those 38 electoral votes to Clinton's count, Clinton would have won. I think the reason why not that many people talked about that is because Texas still voted for Trump by almost 10 percentage points. But now that we're talking about Texas moving more and more to the left, I think that's a good point to bring up. Texas will be a huge help for the Democrats if they can manage to win that state over. Just the fact that that one state could have given Clinton the victory, that just shows how much those 38 electoral votes matter. But if Republicans are not able to hold on to Texas, if Democrats are able to grab a hold of those electoral votes, one thing I say that the Republicans could possibly do is continue what they've been doing in the Midwestern area with the Rust Belt, focus more on those areas and try to solidify their grasp on those states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then Minnesota also, and then maybe possibly Illinois, but Illinois has Chicago. Chicago votes heavily in Democrats' favor, so I don't know if Illinois is a possibility. But there's also like New Hampshire. There's also some areas in Maine. There's a few other areas they could definitely look to in order to get some more electoral votes there. The other alternative for Republicans, if they want to keep a hold on Texas, is just for them to change up either their campaign strategy, their rhetoric, or just their flat out policy proposals. What they could do is maybe move to the left on a few policy proposals to maybe appeal to some of the Democratic voters, maybe turn them back to the Republican Party. That's one possibility. Or they could just campaign better, maybe change up the rhetoric a bit, maybe change what they focus on a bit in their campaign speeches. There's many different possibilities what they can do. I'm not a campaign manager, it's just my ideas, but Texas is going to be a pretty important state starting in 2024, I would say. It's going to be a really crucial state for both parties to campaign in at the presidential level, especially. But I'm actually kind of excited for that as a Texan myself. It'll be kind of nice to finally see candidates start focusing on Texas in the presidential elections after they've basically ignored it for the past several decades. Because that's one of the things that I personally don't like about the Electoral College. Candidates don't focus on that many states. They only focus on the swing states, the states that are only a couple points in one direction or a couple points in the other. Don't get me wrong, I understand why we have the Electoral College, but I'm just saying that's one of the downsides of it. The fact that candidates only have an incentive to campaign in a certain state if that state's a swing state. Well, I think I just figured out my video topic for tomorrow's video, just from what all I've just talked about. Just a hint though, it's gonna be related to the Electoral College in some way. Thanks for watching this video, guys. I hope I see you tomorrow.